The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Sarah Mitchell adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses and gathered her papers from the faculty meeting. The hallways of Westfield High School echoed with the distant sounds of after-school activities, but Sarah's mind was elsewhere. As she walked toward her classroom to collect her things, she had no idea that in just a few minutes, her carefully constructed quiet life would collide with a past she'd worked so hard to leave behind. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Mitchell had always been the kind of teacher who blended into the background. At 32, she possessed an understated presence that made her nearly invisible in the bustling corridors of Westfield High School. Her auburn hair was always pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her clothes were practical rather than fashionable, and she spoke in measured tones that never rose above what was necessary to maintain order in her chemistry classroom. The students at Westfield had labeled her Miss Quiet within her first week of teaching there 3 years ago. She never participated in the loud conversations in the faculty lounge, never joined the other teachers for their Friday night gatherings at Murphy's Bar downtown, and never shared personal stories during those awkward icebreaker sessions at the beginning of each school year. What none of them knew was that Sarah Mitchell had spent 8 years as a member of the Army's 75th Ranger Regiment, specializing in close-quarters combat and tactical operations in some of the world's most dangerous locations. Her transition to civilian life had been deliberate and complete. She'd chosen teaching chemistry because it was methodical, predictable, and safe. The controlled environment of a high school laboratory was a stark contrast to the chaos she'd once navigated with lethal precision. Sarah's classroom was located in the science wing, down a corridor that was usually deserted by 4:30 in the afternoon. She preferred it that way. The isolation allowed her to prepare her lessons without interruption and gave her the peace she craved after years of constant hypervigilance. Her students respected her, though they often mistook her calm demeanor for weakness. She maintained discipline through consistency rather than confrontation, and her chemistry classes had some of the highest test scores in the district. On this particular Tuesday afternoon in October, Sarah was staying late to grade midterm exams. The autumn sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the windows of her classroom. She dismissed her last class at 2:15 and had been working steadily ever since, her red pen moving efficiently across test papers filled with chemical equations, and the peace was shattered by the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway, followed by raucous laughter that echoed off the polished floors. Sarah glanced up from her grading, her instincts immediately alerting her to potential trouble. The laughter was too loud, too aggressive, and it was getting closer. Marcus Webb and his crew were making their way down the science corridor, their voices bouncing off the walls with the kind of arrogance that came from never facing real consequences. Marcus was 18, a senior who'd been held back twice and now towered over most of his classmates at 6'4". His broad shoulders and thick neck made him look more like a bouncer than a high school student, and he used his size to intimidate anyone who crossed his path. Flanking him were Tyler Brooks and Danny Russo, both seniors who'd found their identity in Marcus's shadow. Tyler was wiry and quick, the kind of kid who threw the first punch and ran when things got serious. Danny was stockier, with a cruel streak that manifested in his enjoyment of other people's discomfort. Together, they'd terrorized Westfield High for the better part of 2 years, and the administration's attempts to control them had been largely ineffective. They just finished what they called collecting dues from some younger students near the gymnasium. Marcus had a system. He'd identify kids who looked like they had money, corner them in isolated areas of the school, and demand payment for protection services. Most kids paid up rather than risk the alternative, and Marcus had built quite a profitable enterprise from his intimidation tactics. The trio was riding high on their latest success when they spotted the light coming from Sarah's classroom. Marcus held up a hand, bringing his crew to a halt outside her door. Through the window, they could see her bent over her desk, completely absorbed in her work. "Well, well," Marcus said, his voice carrying a menacing undertone. "Look what we have here." Miss Quiet, all alone in her little lab, Tyler snickered. "She's probably got cash in there for lab supplies or something. Teachers always keep petty cash around." Danny cracked his knuckles. "And she's too scared to do anything about it if we decide to take a look around." Sarah heard their voices through the door, and every muscle in her body tensed. Her civilian persona wanted to ignore them, to hope they'd move on and leave her alone. But her training was already kicking in, assessing the situation and calculating potential threats. 3 voices, all male, all young but physically mature. Their tone suggested they were looking for trouble, and she was an isolated target. Marcus pushed open the door without knocking, his bulk filling the doorframe. "Hey there, Miss Mitchell. Working late?" Sarah looked up slowly, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp. "The school day is over, Marcus. You should be heading home." "Yeah, well, we thought we'd stop by and see how our favorite teacher is doing," Marcus said, stepping into the classroom. Tyler and Danny followed, spreading out to flank him in a formation that Sarah recognized as a basic intimidation tactic. "Is there something you need?" Sarah asked, setting down her pen but keeping her hands visible, and relaxed on the desk. Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Actually, yeah. We're running a little short on cash, and we heard teachers sometimes keep money in their classrooms. Thought maybe you could help us out." Sarah's expression didn't change, but internally, she was running through scenarios. The classroom had 2 exits, the main door, which was now blocked by the 3 boys, and an emergency exit that led to the exterior fire escape. Her desk was positioned with her back to the windows, giving her limited options for movement. "I don't keep money in my classroom," she said calmly. "If you're having financial difficulties, I'd be happy to direct you to the guidance counselor who can help you apply for assistance programs." Tyler laughed. "Did you hear that? She wants to send us to the guidance counselor. That's real sweet." "Miss Mitchell," Danny added, taking a step closer to her desk, "but we're not looking for assistance programs. We're looking for immediate assistance." Marcus moved forward, placing his hands on Sarah's desk and leaning over it. His size was meant to intimidate, and Sarah could smell the mixture of cologne and sweat that clung to his clothes. "Here's the thing, Teach. We know you've got to have some cash around here somewhere. Maybe in your purse, maybe in your desk drawers. We're not greedy, we'll just take what we need." Sarah remained perfectly still, her breathing steady and controlled. "I've already told you I don't have money here. I suggest you leave before this situation escalates." "Escalates?" Marcus straightened up, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Lady, you're a chemistry teacher who probably weighs 120 pounds soaking wet. What exactly do you think is going to escalate?" That was when Tyler made his first mistake. Emboldened by Marcus's words and misreading Sarah's calm demeanor as fear, he reached across the desk and grabbed her wrist. "Come on, Teach. Just show us where you keep the good stuff, and we'll be out of your hair." The moment Tyler's fingers closed around her wrist, Sarah's world shifted. The fluorescent light seemed brighter, the sounds sharper, and time seemed to slow down. Her muscle memory kicked in, overriding 3 years of carefully maintained civilian behavior, in one fluid motion. Sarah twisted her wrist in a way that broke Tyler's grip while simultaneously grabbing his extended arm. She stood up from her chair, using the momentum to pull Tyler forward and off balance. Before he could react, she had spun him around and applied a control hold that left him gasping and unable to move. "What the hell?" Danny started to say, but Sarah was already moving. She released Tyler, who stumbled backward into a desk, and turned to face Marcus and Danny. Her entire demeanor had changed. Gone was the quiet, unassuming teacher. In her place stood someone who moved with the fluid confidence of a trained fighter, someone whose eyes had gone cold and calculating. "You need to leave," Sarah said, her voice still calm but carrying an edge that made all three boys take a step back. Right now. Marcus, however, wasn't ready to back down. His pride had been wounded by watching this crew member get handled so easily by a woman he'd dismissed as harmless. "Oh, so the little teacher wants to play rough? That's fine by me." He lunged forward, his size and anger making him overconfident. Sarah sidestepped his charge with minimal effort, using his momentum against him. As he stumbled past her, she delivered a precise strike to a pressure point on his shoulder that sent him crashing into the WHITEBOARD. Danny, seeing his leader go down, tried to grab Sarah from behind. She sensed his approach without turning around, ducked under his reaching arms, and swept his legs out from under him. He hit the floor hard, the impact knocking the wind out of him. Tyler, still recovering from the initial altercation, pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the cops. This crazy teacher just attacked us." Sarah moved toward him with a purposeful stride that made him back up against the wall. "Go ahead and call them," she said. "I'm sure they'll be very interested to hear about 3 students who entered a teacher's classroom after hours and attempted to rob her." "We didn't rob anybody," Tyler protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "You demanded money, you physically grabbed me, and you threatened me," Sarah replied. "That's attempted robbery and assault. The security cameras in the hallway will back up my story." Marcus was pulling himself up from the floor, his shoulder aching from whatever Sarah had done to it. "You're crazy, lady. We were just messing around." "No," Sarah said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You were attempting to intimidate and rob a teacher. But you picked the wrong target." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She moved to her desk and opened the bottom drawer, pulling out a small device that looked like a panic button. "This is connected directly to the school's security system and the local police department. One push, and you'll have officers here in less than 5 minutes." The 3 boys exchanged glances, their bravado rapidly evaporating. They'd come in expecting to push around a meek teacher and walk away with easy money. Instead, they'd encountered someone who'd handled all 3 of them without breaking a sweat. "You can't prove anything," Danny said, but he was already edging toward the door. Sarah picked up her phone and held it up, the screen showing a recording app that was still running. "Actually, I can. I started recording the moment you walked into my classroom uninvited. I have everything on audio, including your demands for money and your physical assault." Marcus's face went pale. "You were recording us?" "It's a habit I developed for documenting parent conferences," Sarah lied smoothly. "I never know when I might need to prove what was said and done." Tyler was the first to crack. "Look, we're sorry, okay? We didn't mean anything by it. We were just goofing around." "Goofing around," Sarah repeated. "Is that what you call it when you corner younger students and demand money from them too?" The question hit home, and she could see the fear in their eyes. They realized she knew more about their activities than they'd thought. "We don't know what you're talking about," Marcus said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Sarah sat back down at her desk, her movements controlled and deliberate. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk out of my classroom. You're going to leave the school grounds, and you're going to think very carefully about the choices you've been making." "And if we don't?" Danny asked, trying to salvage some dignity. Sarah looked at him with the kind of stare that had once made hardened soldiers reconsider their actions. "Then I'll push this button, share this recording with the administration and the police, and you'll discover that assault and attempted robbery carry serious consequences, especially when they're committed on school property." The 3 boys stood in uncomfortable silence, the weight of their situation settling in. They'd walked into what they thought would be an easy score, and instead found themselves completely outmaneuvered by someone they'd underestimated. Marcus, still nursing his shoulder, was the first to move toward the door. "This isn't over," he muttered. Sarah's voice stopped him cold. "Yes, it is. And if you or your friends ever attempt to intimidate another student or teacher in this school, I'll make sure that recording finds its way to people who can do something about it." Tyler and Danny followed Marcus toward the door, their swagger completely gone. As they reached the threshold, Sarah spoke one more time. "Gentlemen, I hope you'll use this experience to make better choices in the future. You're all intelligent enough to succeed without resorting to bullying and theft." The door closed behind them, leaving Sarah alone in her classroom once again. She sat quietly for a moment, allowing her heart rate to return to normal and her defensive instincts to settle back into their carefully maintained dormancy. Outside in the hallway, the three boys walked in stunned silence. None of them spoke until they were out of the building and standing in the parking lot. "What the hell just happened in there?" Tyler finally asked. Marcus rubbed his shoulder, which was still aching from whatever pressure point Sarah had hit. "I don't know, but that wasn't normal. Teachers don't move like that." "Did you see how fast she was?" Danny added. "It was like she knew exactly what we were going to do before we did it." They stood there in the fading daylight, each of them replaying the encounter in their minds. What had started as routine intimidation had turned into something none of them could fully understand or explain. The next morning at Westfield High School arrived with an unusual tension that seemed to permeate the hallways. Word traveled fast in a school environment, and although the three boys hadn't shared the details of their encounter with Sarah Mitchell, their subdued behavior hadn't gone unnoticed by their usual victims or the students who typically feared them. Sarah arrived at school at her usual time, 7:15 in the morning, carrying her worn leather messenger bag and a travel mug of black coffee. She'd spent the previous evening reflecting on what had happened, questioning whether she'd handled the situation appropriately. Part of her wondered if she should report the incident to Principal Davidson, but she knew that would inevitably lead to questions about her background that she wasn't prepared to answer. The science wing was quiet as she unlocked her classroom door and began her morning routine. She arranged her lesson plans on the desk, checked that all her equipment was properly stored, and wrote the day's objectives on the whiteboard in her careful handwriting. Everything appeared normal, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the previous day's events had set something in motion that couldn't be easily contained. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus Webb was having breakfast with his father, Robert Webb, a construction foreman who believed that strength was the only currency that mattered in life. Robert had taught his son early that the world was divided into predators and prey, and that showing weakness was the fastest way to become someone else's victim. "You look like somebody ran over your dog," Robert said, not looking up from his newspaper. "What's eating at you?" Marcus pushed his cereal around in his bowl, unsure how to explain what had happened without sounding weak. "Nothing, Dad, just tired." Robert finally looked at his son, noting the way Marcus favored his left shoulder and the unusual quietness that had replaced his typical morning arrogance. "Somebody gives you trouble at school?" "No," Marcus said quickly. "Everything's fine." But everything wasn't fine, and Robert Webb had spent enough years reading people to know when his son was lying. "Marcus, you've been walking around here like somebody took the wind out of your sails. What happened?" Marcus finally looked up, meeting his father's eyes. "There's this teacher at school. Miss Mitchell, she teaches chemistry. What about her? She's—" Marcus struggled to find the words. "She's not what she seems." Robert set down his newspaper, giving his son his full attention. "Explain." "Yesterday, Tyler and Danny went to her classroom. We were just messing around, you know. Thought maybe she had some cash lying around or something. But when Tyler grabbed her arm, she went crazy. She moved like some kind of fighter or something. Robert's expression hardened. A teacher put her hands on you. It wasn't like that, Marcus said quickly. I mean, it was, but she was defending herself. We were the ones who grabbed her first. So you're telling me that you and 2 other boys went into a woman's classroom and tried to rob her, and when she defended herself, you got your ass handed to you? Marcus winced at his father's blunt assessment. When you put it like that, ... That's exactly how I'm putting it, Robert said, his voice rising. What the hell is wrong with you? I raised you to be strong, not to pick on women who can't defend themselves. And apparently, this one could defend herself just fine. Dad, you don't understand. She wasn't normal. The way she moved, the way she handled all 3 of us ... It was like she had training or something. Robert studied his son's face, noting the genuine confusion and fear in his eyes. Training like what? I don't know. Military maybe? Police? She knew exactly what she was doing, and she barely broke a sweat doing it. The conversation was interrupted by Robert's phone buzzing with a text message. He glanced at it and frowned. I've got to get to the job site early today. We'll finish this conversation tonight. And Marcus? Yeah, Dad? Stay away from that teacher. If she's got the kind of training you're talking about, you don't want to find out what else she's capable of. At school, Sarah's first period advanced chemistry class proceeded normally. Her students, a mix of seniors and ambitious juniors, were focused on balancing complex equations and seemed oblivious to any underlying tension. Sarah found comfort in the familiar rhythm of teaching, the predictable flow of questions and explanations that allowed her to maintain her carefully constructed civilian identity. It was during her second period prep time that Principal Davidson knocked on her classroom door. Elizabeth Davidson was a no-nonsense administrator in her mid-50s who'd been running Westfield High for over a decade. She had a reputation for being fair but firm, and she made it her business to know what was happening in every corner of her school. Sarah, do you have a few minutes? Principal Davidson asked, stepping into the classroom. Of course, Sarah replied, gesturing to the chair beside her desk. What can I do for you? Principal Davidson closed the door behind her and took the offered seat. I wanted to talk to you about Marcus Webb and his friends. I've been hearing some interesting rumors this morning. Sarah kept her expression neutral, though internally she was calculating how much the principal might know. What kind of rumors? The kind that suggests they had an encounter with you yesterday afternoon that left them considerably more subdued than usual. Now normally I'd be celebrating anything that could humble those 3, but I'm curious about the details. Sarah chose her words carefully. They came to my classroom after hours yesterday. I got the impression they were looking for trouble, but nothing significant happened. I encouraged them to leave, and they did. Principal Davidson studied Sarah's face with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent years dealing with teenagers and their creative interpretations of truth. Sarah, I've been an educator for 25 years, and I've never seen Marcus Webb look genuinely rattled. This morning, he walked past Mrs. Henderson's classroom without so much as a smirk, and she's been one of his favorite targets since he started here. Maybe he's finally growing up, Sarah suggested. Or maybe something happened that gave him a new perspective on consequences, Principal Davidson replied. Look, I'm not here to interrogate you. If those boys stepped out of line and you handled it appropriately, then I'm grateful. But I need to know if there's anything I should be aware of from an administrative standpoint. Sarah made a decision. They implied that they were looking for money. When I told them I didn't have any, one of them grabbed my arm. I removed myself from the situation and made it clear that their behavior was unacceptable. They left shortly after. And you're not injured? You don't need medical attention or want to file a report. No to both questions. I'm fine, and I believe they understood that their behavior was inappropriate. Principal Davidson nodded slowly. I have to ask, Do you have any kind of self-defense training? The way Marcus looked this morning suggests he encountered something he wasn't expecting. Sarah felt the weight of the question, knowing that her answer could open doors she preferred to keep closed. I took some basic self-defense classes in college, nothing formal. It wasn't technically a lie, though it was certainly incomplete. Her basic self-defense had involved 8 years of advanced combat training with some of the military's most elite units. Well, whatever you did, it seems to have made an impression, Principal Davidson said, standing up. I want you to know that if you ever feel unsafe here, you should come to me immediately. And if those boys bother you again, I want to know about it. I appreciate that, Elizabeth. I really do. After Principal Davidson left, Sarah sat quietly in her classroom, staring out the window at the student parking lot. She could see Marcus's lifted pickup truck, a black Chevy Silverado with aggressive tires and tinted windows. The vehicle seemed to reflect its owner's personality, oversized, intimidating, and designed to command attention. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her classroom door opening. She turned to see Jennifer Hayes, a fellow science teacher who taught biology in the classroom next door. Jennifer was one of the few faculty members who'd made genuine attempts to befriend Sarah over the years, though Sarah had politely deflected most social overtures. "Hey, stranger," Jennifer said, closing the door behind her. "I heard Principal Davidson was here earlier. Everything okay?" Jennifer was in her late 20s, energetic and outgoing in ways that Sarah envied but couldn't emulate. She had curly, red hair that she often wore in creative styles, and she wasn't afraid to incorporate unconventional teaching methods that sometimes drew complaints from more traditional parents. "Everything's fine," Sarah replied. "Just routine administrative stuff." Jennifer pulled up a chair and sat down uninvited, a habit that would have annoyed Sarah if she hadn't grown to appreciate Jennifer's persistent friendliness. "Come on, Sarah. I've been teaching next door to you for 2 years. I know the difference between routine administrative stuff and whatever this was." Sarah sighed, recognizing that Jennifer wasn't going to let this go easily. "Some students came by my classroom yesterday after hours. They were looking for trouble, but nothing serious happened." "Students plural? As in more than one?" "3 of them." Jennifer's eyes widened. 3 male students cornered you alone in your classroom after hours, and you're calling it nothing serious? "I handled the situation." "How exactly does a chemistry teacher handle 3 teenage boys who are looking for trouble?" The question hung in the air between them, and Sarah realized she was treading into dangerous territory. Jennifer was intelligent and observant, and any explanation that didn't ring true would only generate more questions. "I made it clear that their behavior was unacceptable and that there would be consequences if they didn't leave," Sarah said finally. "And they just left? Just like that?" Sometimes people respond to authority when it's presented clearly and confidently. Jennifer studied Sarah's face, noting something in her demeanor that she'd never seen before. There was a confidence, a sense of contained strength that seemed at odds with the quiet, unassuming woman she'd worked beside for 2 years. "Sarah, can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask." "I might not answer. What did you do before you came here? I know you have your teaching certification and your chemistry degree, but there's something about you that doesn't quite fit the typical teacher mold." Sarah felt her carefully constructed walls being probed, and her instinct was to deflect and redirect. "I worked in a lab for a few years after college. Industrial chemistry. It wasn't very exciting." "A lab," Jennifer repeated. "What kind of lab?" "Government contract work. Mostly classified stuff, which is why I don't talk about it much." Again, it wasn't technically a lie. Much of her military service had involved working with chemical compounds for various applications, from identifying potential threats to developing defensive countermeasures. Jennifer seemed to accept this explanation, though Sarah could see the curiosity still burning in her eyes. "Well, Whatever you did in that lab, it apparently prepared you for handling difficult situations. The conversation was interrupted by the bell signaling the end of the second period. Students began filing into Sarah's classroom for third period. General chemistry, their voices and energy filling the space with familiar chaos. "We should grab lunch together sometime," Jennifer said as she stood to leave. "I feel like I barely know you after all this time." "I'd like that," Sarah replied, though she knew she'd find a way to avoid making concrete plans. As Jennifer left and Sarah's students settled into their seats, she tried to focus on the day's lesson plan. But her mind kept drifting to the conversation she just had and the realization that her encounter with Marcus and his friends had created ripples that were spreading beyond her control. Third period progressed smoothly until about halfway through the class when Sarah noticed Tyler Brooks walking past her classroom windows. He wasn't supposed to be in this part of the building during the third period, and his presence triggered her always active situational awareness. Tyler paused outside her door, peering through the window at her students. When he saw Sarah looking back at him, he quickly moved on, but not before she caught something in his expression that concerned her. It wasn't the fear she'd expected to see after yesterday's encounter. Instead, there was something calculating, almost predatory. After class, Sarah made a mental note to check the hallway security camera footage if she could find a legitimate reason to request it. Her instincts were telling her that yesterday's confrontation hadn't resolved anything. It had simply changed the nature of the threat. The rest of the school day passed without incident, but Sarah remained hyper-vigilant, cataloging every unusual sound in the hallway and noting the location of potential threats and escape routes. It was exhausting to maintain this level of awareness while simultaneously teaching chemistry, but she couldn't seem to turn off the defensive protocols that had kept her alive in much more dangerous environments. As the final bell rang and students began flooding the hallways, Sarah packed her materials with deliberate efficiency. She decided to leave earlier than usual, hoping to avoid any potential after-hours encounters. But as she stepped into the hallway, she nearly collided with Detective Ray Martinez of the County Sheriff's Department. Detective Martinez was a compact man in his early 40s with prematurely gray hair and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to catalog everything around him. He wore a simple black suit that couldn't quite conceal the shoulder holster underneath his jacket. "Miss Mitchell? I'm Detective Martinez. I was wondering if I could have a word with you about an incident that may have occurred in your classroom yesterday." Sarah's heart rate increased slightly, but her expression remained calm. "Of course, Detective. Would you like to step into my classroom? That would be perfect." As they entered her classroom and Detective Martinez closed the door behind them, Sarah's military training kicked into high gear. She analyzed his posture, his tone of voice, and the way his eyes swept the room, looking for clues about why he was really there and what he might already know. "I'll get straight to the point," Detective Martinez said. "We received an anonymous tip this morning suggesting that there was some kind of altercation in this classroom yesterday afternoon involving you and 3 male students." "An anonymous tip," Sarah repeated carefully. "The caller suggested that you may have assaulted the students and that they were too intimidated to report it through official channels." Sarah felt a cold anger building in her chest, but she kept her voice level. "Detective, 3 students entered my classroom after hours yesterday without permission. One of them physically grabbed me. I defended myself and asked them to leave, which they did. If anyone was assaulted, it was me." Detective Martinez pulled out a small notebook and pen. "Can you walk me through exactly what happened?" Sarah gave him a detailed account of the previous day's events, being careful to frame everything in terms of self-defense and emphasizing the students' role as the aggressors. Detective Martinez took notes and asked clarifying questions, his professional demeanor giving nothing away about his thoughts on her story. "Miss Mitchell, I have to ask, do you have any formal training in self-defense or martial arts?" The question she'd been dreading had finally been asked directly by someone whose job it was to investigate discrepancies in people's stories. Sarah made a split-second decision about how much truth to reveal. I have some training, yes. I felt it was important for a woman living alone to be able to protect herself. What kind of training? Mixed martial arts primarily. I trained at a gym for several years. Detective Martinez wrote this down, then looked up at her with an expression that suggested he was evaluating her credibility. The reason I ask is that the anonymous caller described your actions as being unusually professional, almost military-like, according to the tip. Sarah's pulse quickened, but she maintained eye contact. I'm not sure what that means, Detective. I did what I felt was necessary to protect myself from 3 much larger individuals who had entered my classroom uninvited and made demands for money. And you're saying they were attempting to rob you? That's exactly what I'm saying. They demanded cash, claimed I must have money in my classroom, and when I refused, one of them grabbed me. Detective Martinez closed his notebook and studied Sarah's face. Miss Mitchell, I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've learned to trust my instincts about people. My instincts tell me that you're telling me the truth about what happened here yesterday. Sarah felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. I appreciate that, Detective. However, he continued, my instincts also tell me that there's more to this story than what you're sharing. And while I don't think you did anything wrong in this situation, I get the feeling that those 3 boys have no idea who they decided to mess with. The statement hung in the air between them, neither quite an accusation nor a compliment. Sarah chose not to respond, maintaining the same neutral expression she'd worn throughout the conversation. Here's my card, Detective Martinez said, handing her a business card with his contact information. If those students bother you again, I want you to call me immediately. And Miss Mitchell, yes? Whatever training you have, wherever you got it, I'm glad you were able to protect yourself. Not every woman in your situation would have been so fortunate. After Detective Martinez left, Sarah sat alone in her classroom, processing what had just happened. Someone had called in an anonymous tip about her, which meant that Marcus Tyler or Danny had talked to someone about yesterday's encounter. The fact that they'd framed it as her assaulting them suggested they were either planning some kind of retaliation or trying to get ahead of potential consequences for their own actions. Either way, Sarah realized that her quiet life at Westfield High School was about to become much more complicated. The anonymous tip to the police had been Danny Russo's idea. After 2 sleepless nights replaying the humiliation they'd suffered at Sarah Mitchell's hands, he'd convinced Marcus and Tyler that they needed to take control of the narrative before word spread throughout the school about how easily a quiet chemistry teacher had handled all 3 of them. Danny came from a family where manipulation and revenge were considered art forms. His uncle, Vincent Russo, ran a small-time operation that walked the line between legitimate business and organized crime, and Danny had absorbed lessons about power dynamics from family gatherings since childhood. Vincent had taught him that when someone embarrassed you, you didn't get mad, you got even, and you did it smart. The key is making her look like the aggressor, Danny had explained to Marcus and Tyler as they sat in Marcus's truck in the parking lot of a convenience store 3 blocks from school. We call in anonymously, say she attacked us, and then when the cops investigate, she has to explain how a little chemistry teacher took down 3 football players. But what if they don't believe us? Tyler had asked, still nursing bruises on his ego more than his body. They don't have to believe us completely, Danny replied. They just have to start asking questions. Once people start digging into her background, they're going to find out she's not who she pretends to be. Marcus had been hesitant at first, but his wounded pride eventually overruled his better judgment. The phone call had been made from a burner phone Danny had acquired for the purpose, and the voice had been disguised enough to avoid immediate recognition. Now, 3 days after Detective Martinez's visit to Sarah's classroom, the three boys were discovering that their plan had created consequences they hadn't anticipated. Word of the police investigation had leaked through the school's administrative grapevine, and suddenly everyone was talking about the mysterious Miss Mitchell, who'd apparently done something dramatic enough to warrant detective involvement. Attention was exactly what they'd hoped to avoid. Instead of quietly getting revenge on a teacher who'd embarrassed them, they'd inadvertently made her the most interesting topic of conversation at Westfield High School. Meanwhile, Sarah had spent those 3 days in a state of heightened awareness that was beginning to take its toll. She'd implemented security measures that felt familiar from her military days, but looked paranoid in a civilian context. She varied her routes to and from school, checked her car for tampering each morning, and had developed contingency plans for different threat scenarios. More importantly, she'd begun reaching out to old contacts, carefully probing to see if her past was secure, or if someone with the right connections might be able to piece together her real background. The conversations had been brief and coded, but they'd given her some reassurance that her military records remained sealed and her transition to civilian life hadn't left obvious breadcrumbs for amateur investigators to follow. On Friday morning, exactly 1 week after the initial confrontation, Sarah arrived at school to find Principal Davidson waiting in her classroom with someone she didn't recognize. The stranger was a woman in her early 50s with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and wearing a charcoal gray suit that screamed federal government. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet Agent Patricia Chun from the Department of Education's Office of Inspector General," Principal Davidson said, her voice carrying an undertone of confusion and concern. Agent Chun stepped forward and extended her hand. "Miss Mitchell, I'd like to speak with you about some questions that have arisen regarding your background and qualifications." Sarah shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip and the way Agent Chun's eyes quickly cataloged details about the classroom and its occupant. "I'm not sure I understand. Is there a problem with my teaching certification?" "Not exactly, Agent," Chun replied. "But we've received information suggesting that there may be discrepancies in your employment history that warrant investigation." Principal Davidson looked genuinely bewildered. "Sarah has been an exemplary teacher here for 3 years. Her students consistently score above district averages, and she's never had a single disciplinary issue." "I'm sure that's true," Agent Chun said diplomatically. "However, federal law requires us to investigate any allegations regarding falsified information on government employment applications, even for positions in public education." Sarah felt the familiar sensation of walls closing in around her, but her training kept her outwardly calm. "What specific allegations are you referring to, Agent Chun?" "We've received a tip suggesting that your stated employment history prior to becoming a teacher may not be accurate. Specifically, questions have been raised about your claimed experience in industrial chemistry and whether that experience actually involved classified government work." The phrasing of the allegation told Sarah several things. First, whoever had made this report had done more research than 3 high school bullies were capable of conducting on their own. Second, they'd been careful to frame their accusations in a way that would trigger federal investigation protocols. Third, someone with knowledge of government employment verification procedures was behind this escalation. "I worked for several years in a government-contracted laboratory," Sarah said carefully. "Much of that work involved classified materials, which is why I don't discuss the specifics." Agent Chun pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through what appeared to be an official document. "Miss Mitchell, we've conducted preliminary checks with the agencies and contractors you listed in your employment history. None of them have records of employing someone with your name and social security number during the time periods you specified." "I'm afraid not. When federal investigators receive credible allegations about falsified employment records, we have to act quickly." "Miss Mitchell, you're not under arrest. but I do need you to come with me voluntarily for questioning." Sarah's mind was racing through options and implications. She could refuse to go, but that would only escalate the situation and draw more attention to her background. She could go voluntarily and try to maintain her cover story, but if someone had already poked holes in her documented history, additional scrutiny would likely expose more inconsistencies. The third option was the one she'd hoped never to consider: reveal enough of the truth to explain the discrepancies while protecting the classified aspects of her military service. "I'll need to make a phone call first," Sarah said. Agent Chun nodded. "You can make your call from our office." As they walked through the hallways of Westfield High School, Sarah was acutely aware of the stares and whispered conversations that followed them. Students and teachers alike had never seen a federal agent escort one of their colleagues out of the building, and speculation would run rampant before the end of first period. The ride to the federal building downtown was conducted in professional silence, giving Sarah time to think through her next moves. The phone call she needed to make would connect her with Colonel James Harrison, her former commanding officer who'd helped orchestrate her transition to civilian life. If anyone could navigate the intersection of federal investigation and classified military records, it was Harrison. The Department of Education's field office was located on the 8th floor of a glass and steel building that housed several federal agencies. Agent Chun led Sarah through a maze of cubicles to a small conference room with a table, 4 chairs, and a recording device that dominated the center of the space. "Before we begin," Agent Chun said, "I want to make sure you understand that anything you say during this interview may be used in administrative or criminal proceedings. You have the right to have an attorney present, though this is currently an administrative investigation rather than a criminal one." Sarah nodded. "I understand. May I make that phone call now?" Agent Chun gestured to a phone on a side table. "You have 15 minutes. Sarah dialed a number she'd memorized but never expected to use. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Harrison." "Colonel, this is Mockingbird," Sarah said, using the code name from her final classified operation. There was a pause then. Harrison's voice became sharp and focused. "Mockingbird, what's your status?" "I'm at a federal building with a DOE investigator. Someone has been digging into my cover identity, and they're finding discrepancies in my employment history. Hold on." Sarah could hear Harrison typing rapidly on a keyboard. "I'm looking at your file now. Your cover should be rock solid." "What kind of discrepancies?" "Employment verification. The agencies and contractors in my background aren't showing records of employing me. That's impossible. We built those records ourselves and, Jesus Christ." "What?" "Someone with high-level access has been systematically removing your cover documentation from federal databases. This isn't some amateur investigation, Mockingbird. This is professional work." Sarah felt her blood turn cold. How professional? The kind that requires security clearances and federal database access. Someone wanted to flush you out, and they're using official channels to do it. "What are my options, Colonel?" "Limited. I can reach out to some people and try to get this investigation shut down, but that will take time and it might draw more attention to your situation. Your other option is controlled disclosure, meaning you reveal enough of your military background to explain the discrepancies without compromising classified operations. Tell them you were military intelligence, that your previous employment was part of a cover identity for classified work, and that your records are sealed for national security reasons." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision. "And if they don't accept that explanation? Then we move to more aggressive measures to protect you. But let's hope it doesn't come to that." "Understood. I'll try the controlled disclosure approach first." "Mockingbird, be careful. Whoever is behind this has resources and patience. They've been planning this for a while." Sarah hung up the phone and returned to the conference table where Agent Chun was waiting with a thick file folder and a digital recorder. Are you ready to proceed, Miss Mitchell? Actually, Agent Chun, I need to make a correction to my previous statements about my employment history. Agent Chun's eyebrows rose slightly. What kind of correction? Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that what she said next would fundamentally change her carefully constructed civilian life. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I did work in government laboratories prior to becoming a teacher. However, that work was conducted as part of my service as an intelligence officer in the United States Army. Agent Chun leaned forward, her expression becoming more intense. You're saying you were military intelligence? I served 8 years in the Army, with the final 5 years in intelligence operations that required deep cover civilian identities. The employment history I provided to Westfield High School was part of a legend created to support classified operations. And you didn't think to mention this when you applied for a teaching position? My military service and the operations I participated in are classified at levels that require special security clearances to discuss. I was advised by my superior officers that revealing my background could compromise ongoing operations and put other personnel at risk. Agent Chun was taking notes rapidly. I'm going to need to verify this with the Department of Defense. You can contact Colonel James Harrison at the Pentagon. He's authorized to confirm my service record without revealing classified details. Miss Mitchell, if what you're telling me is true, why didn't you simply apply to teach under programs designed for transitioning military personnel? There are channels for people with your background. Because those programs would have required disclosure of my specific military occupational specialty, which would have compromised my cover identity and potentially endangered ongoing operations. Agent Chun sat back in her chair, clearly processing this unexpected turn in her investigation. So you're saying that someone with knowledge of classified military operations has been systematically exposing your cover identity? That's exactly what I'm saying. And Agent Chun, if that's the case, then this investigation may have national security implications that go far beyond employment verification. The statement hung in the air between them, and Sarah could see Agent Chun's mind working through the ramifications. If Sarah was telling the truth about her military background, then whoever had initiated this investigation had access to classified information and was using it to target a former intelligence operative. I'm going to need to make some phone calls, Agent Chun said finally. This may take several hours to sort out. While Agent Chun stepped out to begin her verification process, Sarah sat alone in the conference room, reflecting on how dramatically her life had changed in the span of a single week. 7 days ago, she'd been a quiet chemistry teacher whose biggest concern was grading midterm exams. Now she was sitting in a federal building, having revealed military secrets to a government investigator, while trying to identify who was attempting to destroy her carefully constructed civilian identity. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. How does it feel to have your past catch up with you? Sarah stared at the message, her training immediately analyzing the implications. Someone was monitoring her situation closely enough to know she was currently being questioned by federal agents. They had her personal phone number, which wasn't publicly available, and they were confident enough to make direct contact. She quickly forwarded the message to Colonel Harrison with a brief explanation, then deleted it from her phone. If someone was tracking her communications, she didn't want to give them more information than necessary. Agent Chen returned 45 minutes later with a completely different demeanor. Her previous skepticism had been replaced by a professional courtesy that suggested she'd received verification of Sarah's claims from authoritative sources. Miss Mitchell, I've spoken with Colonel Harrison and several other individuals at the Pentagon. Your military service and the classification levels involved have been confirmed. And the investigation into my employment history is being transferred to a different agency with appropriate security clearances. The Department of Education is closing our file on this matter. Sarah felt some of the tension leave her shoulders, but she knew the larger threat remained unresolved. Agent Chun, I received a threatening text message while you were making your calls. Someone is monitoring the situation very closely. Agent Chun's expression became serious again. What kind of threatening message? Sarah showed her the forwarded message she'd sent to Colonel Harrison. They know I'm here. They have my personal contact information, and they're taunting me about my past being exposed. Miss Mitchell, I think you need to consider the possibility that you're dealing with someone who has a personal vendetta against you. This level of effort and resources suggests more than just casual interest in discrediting a high school teacher. Oh. The drive back to Westfield High School was quiet, both women lost in their own thoughts about the implications of what they'd uncovered. Sarah's mind was racing through her military service, trying to identify anyone who might have both the motivation and resources to orchestrate such an elaborate scheme. When they arrived at the school, Sarah was surprised to see Detective Martinez's patrol car in the parking lot. Agent Chun noticed it too and asked if Sarah wanted her to stay. But Sarah declined the offer. She was beginning to understand that running from her past hadn't worked, and she was going to have to face whatever came next with the skills and training that had kept her alive in much more dangerous situations. Detective Martinez was waiting in Principal Davidson's office, along with Principal Davidson herself and two people Sarah didn't recognize. One was a man in his 60s wearing an expensive suit, and the other was a woman about Sarah's age in business attire. Miss Mitchell, Principal Davidson said as Sarah entered the office, these are attorneys representing the Webb family. They've come with some serious accusations. The man in the expensive suit stepped forward. Miss Mitchell, I'm Richard Thornton, and this is my associate, Lisa Park. We represent Robert Webb and his son Marcus in a potential lawsuit against you and the school district. Sarah's training kept her expression neutral, but internally she was calculating threat levels and strategic responses. What kind of lawsuit, Mr. Thornton? Our client alleges that you assaulted his son using military-grade combat techniques, causing both physical injury and psychological trauma. We have medical records documenting bruising and soft tissue damage consistent with professional-level martial arts training. Your client's son, along with two friends, entered my classroom without permission and attempted to rob me, Sarah replied calmly. I defended myself using reasonable force. Lisa Park opened a folder and pulled out several photographs. These images show the extent of Marcus Webb's injuries. The bruising pattern on his shoulder is consistent with pressure point manipulation taught in advanced military combat training. Sarah glanced at the photographs, noting that the bruising was actually minimal and would heal completely within a few days. But she also recognized that the lawyers had done their homework about military combat techniques. Furthermore, Richard Thornton continued, we have evidence that you misrepresented your background when you applied for employment with the school district. Our investigation has revealed that you are a former military operative with specialized training in violence and deception. Principal Davidson looked shocked. Sarah, is this true? Before Sarah could answer, Detective Martinez spoke up. Actually, that's not quite accurate. Miss Mitchell's military service has been verified by federal authorities, and her employment history discrepancies were the result of classified cover identities created for national security purposes. Thornton's confident expression faltered slightly. Detective, we weren't informed that there was an ongoing federal investigation because it was classified, Detective Martinez replied. What I can tell you is that Miss Mitchell's background has been thoroughly vetted by agencies with much higher security clearances than any of us possess. Sarah realized that Detective Martinez had been in communication with Agent Chun and possibly Colonel Harrison. The coordination suggested that her situation was being handled at levels well above local law enforcement and school administration. That may be, Lisa Park interjected, but it doesn't change the fact that a person with advanced military combat training used that training against high school students. Regardless of her service record, that represents a disproportionate response to the situation. Actually, said a new voice from the doorway, it represents exactly the appropriate response to an attempted robbery. Everyone turned to see Colonel Harrison entering the office, wearing his dress uniform with ribbons and decorations that immediately commanded respect from everyone present. His presence transformed the dynamic in the room, bringing military authority into what had been a civilian dispute. "Colonel Harrison, Pentagon Intelligence Division," he said, addressing the room in general. "I'm here to provide context for Miss Mitchell's background and to ensure that national security interests are protected in this matter." Richard Thornton recovered his composure quickly. "Colonel, with all due respect, this is a civilian matter involving assault allegations against a public school employee. Mr. Thornton, when those allegations involve a former intelligence operative whose classified service record is being used as evidence in legal proceedings, it becomes a national security matter. Miss Mitchell's military training and service are classified information that cannot be discussed in open court or used as the basis for civil litigation. Are you saying we can't sue her because she used to be in the military?" Lisa Park asked. "I'm saying that any lawsuit that attempts to use her specialized training as evidence of excessive force would require disclosure of classified military techniques and operations. That's not going to be permitted." Colonel Harrison turned to Sarah. "Miss Mitchell, your reassignment is effective immediately. You'll be returning to active duty for a special assignment that requires your particular skills and background." Sarah blinked in surprise. "Sir, I thought I was permanently retired from service. Circumstances have changed. Someone with access to classified information has been targeting you, and we need to identify and neutralize that threat. Your civilian cover has been compromised, so we're bringing you back into the fold where we can provide proper protection." Principal Davidson looked confused and concerned. "Colonel Sarah has contractual obligations to the school district. She can't just disappear in the middle of the semester. Ma'am, Miss Mitchell is a member of the Individual Ready Reserve, which means she can be recalled to active duty at any time for national security purposes. Her civilian employment is secondary to her military obligations." The lawyers exchanged glances, clearly recognizing that their case had just become infinitely more complicated. Suing a former military operative was one thing, but taking legal action against an active duty intelligence officer involved national security implications that could shut down their case before it reached court. "This is highly irregular," Richard Thornton said. "We'll need to research the legal precedents for this situation." "You're welcome to research whatever you'd like," Colonel Harrison replied. "But I can save you some time. Military personnel on classified assignments are protected from civil litigation that could compromise ongoing operations. Miss Mitchell's recall to active duty places her under that protection." Sarah was processing the rapid changes in her situation. In the span of a few hours, she'd gone from being a high school chemistry teacher under federal investigation to being an active duty military officer with protection from civil lawsuits. But she also understood that this protection came with a price. Her carefully constructed civilian life was over. "When do I report for duty, Colonel?" she asked. "Immediately. We have a car waiting outside to take you to the airport. Your personal effects will be collected and forwarded to your new assignment location." Sarah turned to Principal Davidson, who looked like she was still trying to process everything that had happened. "Elizabeth, I'm sorry for the disruption this has caused. You've been a wonderful administrator to work for. Sarah, I don't understand any of this, but I hope you'll be safe whatever you're going to be doing." As Sarah gathered her personal items from her desk drawer, she reflected on the week that had changed everything. Marcus Webb and his friends had thought they were targeting a weak chemistry teacher, But they'd inadvertently exposed a trained operative whose past had been carefully hidden for national security reasons. The anonymous tip that was supposed to discredit her had instead triggered a federal investigation that revealed someone with high-level access was targeting her. The lawsuit that was meant to punish her had instead resulted in her being recalled to active duty with federal protection. Walking out of Westfield High School for the last time, Sarah realized that sometimes the best defense against bullies, whether they were high school students or sophisticated adversaries with classified access, was simply being exactly who you were trained to be. Colonel Harrison was waiting by a black sedan with government plates. Ready for your new assignment, Major Mitchell? Sarah smiled, hearing her military rank for the first time in 3 years. Ready, sir. What's the mission? Finding out who's been digging into classified military records and using that information to target former operatives. Turns out you're not the only one who's been exposed. As the sedan pulled away from Westfield High School, Sarah looked back one last time at the building where she'd spent 3 quiet years trying to be someone she wasn't. The bullies who'd grabbed her waist that afternoon had no idea they'd just helped uncover a national security threat and returned a highly trained operative to active duty. Sometimes the quiet teacher really was exactly as dangerous as she appeared to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.